Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the Fertility Matters show or by Screamy on UK Health Radio. And today we're welcoming back our lovely Sharon Mustard from Easy Birthing. Sharon is the founder, director of Easy Birthing, from fertility to parenthood, and as a psychotherapist and hypnotherapist, counselor, based in Salisbury in the UK, but does online work. And she's been supporting women and men in their journeys towards becoming a parent for over 27 years, which is remarkable. That's a really long stretch of time. So lots and lots of experience. Sharon provides specialist services in hypnosis and psychotherapy, and that's for fertility, pregnancy, postnatal and mental health and parental supporting. So a big welcome, Sharon, and thank you for coming back to us. And I think today we're going to have a little chat about fertility and blockages, which sounds really interesting to me. And how we can learn to trust again, and based on the fact that some of those blockages are relevant to lack of trust in whatever lack of trust means in terms of the medical system or your partner or whatever it is. So just starting with a little bit of background and infertility blockages and how we learn to trust again. What is your experience on what kind of things you come across in couples coming to you, or individuals coming to you with those kind of blockages?
Sure. Okay. So first of all, I suppose it's important to realize that blockages, and we're talking here in terms of psychological blockages, they're there to attempt to help us. So the intention is that this is in our best interest to block. So I think that that's really important to kind of grasp, first of all. Of course, we may have got it wrong, or our subconscious in this case may well be raising something from the past that we've then generalized. So, for example, we had a situation quite recently with a woman who was an adult carer for her mum with MS and quite advanced multiple sclerosis. And she, really wanted to conceive. They had been through 7.5 years of wanting to conceive, exactly. So a long journey already, and the build-up of stress, and stress is very, very linked to blocks as well, had certainly happened over those 7.5 years. So long story short, she had 2 cycles of IVF, which hadn't worked for her. They had one final cycle. So of course, everything, if you like, was riding on this. And so going back to blockages, we really were looking for what that psychological block, if there was one, because there isn't with everyone, was for her. She didn't feel that she had prolonged stress. There didn't seem to be anything obvious, shall we say.
Right.
And
so it wasn't manifesting in any way that you could tell, oh yes, this is definitely happening.
Absolutely. But what we noticed was that with hypnotherapy, we found out she imagined herself kind of almost metaphorically running this journey like a marathon, and she was determined and she had drive and everything. That was all great.
Wow.
But, and this is where the block became very obvious as to what this was. Everybody was clapping her along. They were all supporting her friends, her family, all behind her, except her mother, who was sitting, she saw, with her arms folded. Now, I think even my client was saying, I'm not sure what that means. So we explored it a bit more and found out that actually she believed that her mum didn't want her to become pregnant because it would take away from her time available to care for her.
And I'm guessing this was nothing her mother said to her. I'm guessing this was her. So it wasn't her mother actually wanting her not to leave her. It was her own vision.
Yeah, her own. Exactly.
Right.
And this is what we mean by subconscious blocks, that I know I've gone quite involved into that example, but I think it's a good example where the blocks are not always obvious to her. And so for her, she was telling herself that she really shouldn't get pregnant. We encouraged her and built up the confidence to talk to her mum. Her mum said anything but. She said because of her experience of MS, she really, really wanted to have a grandchild. And so, you know, this was everything that she was actually staying on. But she hadn't wanted to say that to her client because she didn't put pressure on her. So there were two people that were assuming things inside their mind. So their internal world and their external world, and the communication between them was very, very different. And what happened? My client is pregnant. She is now 5 weeks. It's early days.
Blessings. That's amazing.
Didn't even get to her third IVF cycle. She conceived naturally in between times.
That's amazing.
And that's after 7.5 years.
I mean, that's so because you clearly said psychological. So I'm kind of wondering, because you know that I've been through my own journey, but I'm kind of wondering, is psychological and emotional attached to each other? Because I kind of feel like one is more of a feely thing and one is more of a sort of brain function thing. But obviously I'm not the expert. Maybe you could just clarify that so if we have listeners and they're kind of saying, well, there's nothing wrong with it, I really want a baby, which obviously your client that you've just shared the journey with was saying the same thing, right? I want a baby, but didn't realize that psychological barrier was there. How would just somebody who's listening now kind of say, well, there may be something and I don't know how to draw it out? Because if you don't feel it and you don't really know that you've got it in there, how do you know to reach out to somebody? How do you know that, oh, you know, I must speak to Sharon because, you know, I really do need help to address this issue?
Sure. Well, of course, we know that psychological affects our emotions, affects what we feel. So if we're aware of a feeling of fear or guilt, so we're aware of quite strong emotions there, and we either don't know why they're there or they're starting to kind of impinge on our fertility journey in itself. You know, we start to become afraid of if it doesn't happen, or sometimes if it does happen, then those would be the times to reach out to a therapist. There isn't always a psychological block. Please be aware of that. But of course, if someone is a little way down their fertility journey, they're going to have had lots of physical tests and investigations. And, you know, which are actually quite sophisticated nowadays as to the hormonal pathways. I mean, you certainly know it's at Screen Me, the hormonal, you know, can actually be looked at and identified. And if nothing physiological is being identified, then the chances that there might be a psychological block, it may even be just prolonged stress from a stressful job or, you know, a relationship that doesn't quite feel right for us.
And we kind of tend to sit there and not really acknowledge that the relationship doesn't feel right, or, you know, sometimes you get people who will say, you know, I want a child, but the other partner isn't 100% invested in that whole process. I mean, I know I've got people that had that same process and they were married for long stretches of time and then they got divorced and then they married somebody else, and within sort of months they'd had a child, even though they didn't have to have IVF or any assisted kind of pregnancy thing. So so I guess the work that you do is around drawing that stuff out, so getting people to talk about it. But again, going back to the question is, how do you as a person kind of go, well, there must be something, because everything else has been, you know, we've been to Screen Me, we've tested our hormones, we've tested our, you know, nutrients and our markers, we've done the vaginal microbiome test, my partner's done the semen microbiome test, we've had genetic testing with our medical practitioner, you know, all of that sort of thing. There's a lot there. But we've been potted and poked for quite a long time now. So, and still nothing's happening. At which point how do you recognize it in yourself that there must be something else, and therefore I ought to go to someone like Easy Birthing to get through this thing? What is that light bulb moment look like for people? What should they be looking out for?
So I would say that light bulb moment is with the kind of history that you're talking about, that hang on, we've tested everything, my partner's tested everything, we just don't know what's going on here. First of all, actually going to a therapist, whether there's a block or not, going to a therapist at that point is going to help you to cope with the experience of that journey so far, the intrusiveness with
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good. UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
In your life, both time-wise and just thinking-wise, the cognitive intrusion there, but also, the kind of the example couple that you said that have gone some way down investigations and tests and nothing's turning up, are going to be quite stressed about what they're actually wanting and desiring. There's going to be doubt creep in as to whether this is ever going to happen. It's probably going to be helplessness about, well, hang on, if nothing's wrong, then why isn't it happening? So there's a real feeling of a loss of control of where they want to go or where they want to go with their partner in their life. So that alone, I would suggest, would be a great benefit on going to a therapist in the first place.
My God, yeah. I wish I'd known easy birthing when I was going through it, because obviously after 8 miscarriages and a stillborn son, it was a hell of a journey for 10 years. It was, ridiculously prodding and poking and trying all the alternative stuff. And yet by the 3rd or 4th miscarriage, I think I'd already sort of almost emotionally closed myself to the possibility that I'd have a child. And in the end, I figured this out years later, Sharon, but had I had someone like you, I could have done so much quicker and been so much better, so much quicker. But, I figured out that after the 3rd or 4th attempt, actually my heart was on another life, that I decided that, who was I doing this for? Was it now for me? Or was it because, my husband then was the last of the Condors, that was his name line that would die with him. Was it for his mother because, she wanted a grandson that would carry the name forward? Was it because my parents wanted a grandchild? Or was it really because I really wanted a child? I didn't question any of those things until really far into the whole process. It was at the end of the 9-10 years that I basically kind of thought, what is this really about now? And had I gone to someone like yourself, obviously that would have been a very different journey. I could have moved on in life a lot sooner and been here doing what I'm doing now, which is helping women who are going through that and saying, there are other possibilities. So whether you end up actually having a child or not having a child, your life doesn't have to be a pot of misery, which mine isn't. I'm blessed that I can actually help other women that, have their children. But equally, with talking to people and experts like you, help women find a way that isn't that, if they've already decided emotionally that they're not invested in it anymore. What does stress look like? What do you mean by stress?
Yeah, so stress is very much something that's experienced within the mind and the body. And actually, it's interesting, we'll be able to draw that bridge between what do we mean by psychological to emotional and even to physical. So it is very much a holistic experience within the mind and the body. So when our mind perceives threat, and I'll go back to that in a moment, but when our mind perceives threat, it will send messages down to our body to prioritize certain systems within our body, particularly anything that's involved in defense. So our reproductive system, whether it's that we're wanting to become pregnant, whether we are pregnant, whether we're giving birth, right the way down, our reproductive system is not involved in defense. It's not involved in maintaining and sustaining our life. And so that is not going to be priority. And the other thing, of course, if our mind perceives threat, then it's not going to want us to try and sustain something that is going to draw our physical resources. Yeah.
And that's so interesting, because from the perspective what we do at Screen Me with food, and what I do, what I do in helping women, is that we focus on the nutrients necessary to support people who are undergoing stress. So, there are compounds in food that can help you if you're in a stressful state to actually physiologically help you change. So if you mix the psychological, the emotional, which you're talking about, with that, then you're saying that that's a formula made in heaven, basically, if you're going through all the time.
Totally.
Right. Okay. So how would you say, so if somebody's kind of sitting in this position, how would you say, stress is experienced in the body and in the mind? What should they be looking for in terms of what they're feeling?
Okay. So, when stress is felt in the body and mind, there's certainly a nervous system activation. If we think about our nervous system, of course, is always switched on, but it may be in the activation stage, so gearing up for action, if you like, or it may be in the returning to equilibrium, that kind of rest and digest, sometimes linking it to food and what you're saying there.
Right.
And of course, if we're in the activation stage for a short period of time, what we call acute stress, that is not an issue. It may be a job interview, or a stressful work.
A life thing. Yeah.
Exactly. A particularly busy week, or whatever that might be. That is all. Yes, we all know what that's all about.
Yes, we all know that. we all know that one.
Yeah. But if it is prolonged or chronic stress, that is when they may start to find that their appetite, their libido, their sleep, so all of these kind of health signs, if you like, that at the core of our being are showing that we're healthy.
So are we talking, Sharon, about parasympathetic and sympathetic systems now? Is that
totally?
Right. So tell us a little bit about that. So for the listeners who don't know what that means.
Sure. Okay, so in a very, very brief summary, so the sympathetic phase of the nervous system is where we are gearing up for action. So that could be everything from excitement, so it could be happy stuff, if you like, to stress. It could be the stress of, one after the other. Stress related to fertility could be bereavement, or loss of some kind. So the sympathetic is geared to actually respond. What we then know of the parasympathetic, in very brief summary, is that is returning us to equilibrium. So that is allowing us to sleep, to eat, to do all of the things that are the immediate, if you like, sustenance to help. Yeah.
Fabulous.
But appetite, you may say, well, exactly. Yeah.
So then how does that,
so we need to
conception and fertility? I mean, knowing what it is now, if you're talking about, well, how do I know whether my system is parasympathetic or sympathetic, or what systems are switched on or off? And how does that actually translate to affecting the ability to conceive naturally, or fertility in general? What are the sort of, how does that turn over to that?
Sure. Well, fertility and a healthy reproductive system, whatever it's engaged in at that time, i.e. conceiving, naturally or by IVF, by the way, we need an optimal hormonal pathway for that to happen. And if the sympathetic phase of the nervous system is switched on, especially in a prolonged way, that is going to affect everything down that cascade of hormones. So very, very brief summary. The brain will actually, or the hypothalamus in the brain, it acts a little bit like the control center, and that will send things like gonadotropin releasing hormone. Thank you, or GnRH, as some of the listeners know that as, and we'll send that down to tell the pituitary gland to release the gonadotropin. So those are things like FSH and LH. If any of your listeners are on a fertility journey, they will know all
They
about
will know, definitely. They'll know the AMH. They'll know, the progesterone and the testosterone and the estrogen, and
Yep.
they will.
You almost feel like you become a medical expert when
Yes,
it's your own journey.
Yes. But then that's quite worrying, because there's a lot of people out there who've been on their own journey and they've done so much research and they've done so much kind of going through the process that they start to share their experience. And sharing your experience is absolutely wonderful, I know, because that helps others. But I always kind of say to people, listen, be very, very mindful to take advice from somebody who's not actually qualified to give advice. Yes, by all means, the emotional side of it, the supporting side of it, knowing what a term means or whatever, but actually saying, well, that person did that and I'm going to try that, because you can get up on a roller coaster and stay there for a really long time before somebody says, stop, jump off, and actually seek proper medical, proper psychological, proper emotional support, proper holistic support with proper protocols that are based on science. So, when people come to screen me after a really long journey, very often they've been going on this, on this circular journey, picking up things from here, picking up things from there. I'm going to try this, I'm going to try that. But actually, they're not really addressing what their issue is. They're picking up from other people's issues. And that doesn't really, I mean, I'm sure in your experience, you've seen people who've come to you initially and gone, well, I've done this and I've done that. And I've talked to this person, or I've talked to that person, or I've joined that group, but actually it's not helping them with their emotional psychological journey.
Yeah.
Because it's very individual, right?
It is very individual.
And what you do is individual help.
Yes, exactly that. And sometimes, yes, it's the red flags of actually going, well, hang on, let's look at just whether that person is a fertility expert, whether they're a nutritionist, whether they're a psychotherapist, whether, right the way over. And sometimes they've got involved in something that is fine, but as you say, just isn't helping. It's neutral, so it's important they get the right help, but also to look hormonally. I mean, we don't say it's all about psychology and subconscious blocks. We absolutely recognize that individually they may definitely benefit from nutritional advice. They may benefit from screening through Screen Me. They may, benefit from doing some physical exercise. You just don't know. They may,
as do we,
physical exercise.
No, absolutely not do physical exercise sometimes, but as do we, the work that I do at Screen Me, because I've got my own clinic and I do Screen Me as well, and I host this show for them. But the work that I do at Screen Me is really about the holistic approach to, what are we looking at? Are we looking at lifestyle? What type of exercise are you doing? And sometimes we find that somebody's trying to conceive and they're doing too much aggressive exercise.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good. UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
Exercise like HIIT, and therefore what they're doing is releasing that cortisol hormone, which from your perspective would be tantamount to a stress hormone. And if you've got too much of that going on, then it's whether it's being released because you're over exercising, whether it's being released because you've got psychological and emotional issues going on, it's still the same hormone, and the response is kind of, in the body physiologically quite similar. So it's really interesting that, you as an emotional psychological practitioner for easy birthing are very aligned to what we're doing at Screen Me, the work that I do at Screen Me, because I think the pillars of health are crucially important. You can't just look at one thing and say, well, that's the actual causal factor of everything that's going on. You can try to look for a root cause factor, but you need to kind of align everything. So, obviously we've talked a little bit about how, the imbalance, the physiological imbalance and the emotional, the psychological imbalance causes a physiological imbalance, hormonal imbalance. And obviously that affects, conception naturally. So what does the whole scenario look like when you're looking at treatments like IVF, when you're going for IUI or assisted conception, IVF work? is stress equally an important factor, and what does that do? We know from the Screen Me perspective that the vaginal microbiome is crucially important. So if anyone's got issues with recurrent miscarriages and stuff I wish I'd knew back then, but that's one of the critical factors, that if your vaginal microbiome is imbalanced, then that can cause like something like a 60% difference in the success of IUI. That's based on studies. From a psychological perspective, where are we in that field of IUI and IVF?
Sure. Okay. So if we think of things other than IVF, first of all, so IUI, for example, so things that still require a healthy egg and a healthy sperm. So what we're looking for there is a healthy response from the body. So stress most definitely can affect that, and I'll go on to IVF in a moment as well. So that whole hormonal cascade right down to the gonads, female gonads being the ovaries, male gonads being the testes, of course. And so that cascade of hormones, needs to be a healthy and an optimal pathway. But when the adrenal gland gets involved, as it does with stress, and produces adrenaline and cortisol in certainly in longer term stresses, that becomes a real issue. So not just acute phases, but something that's prolonged. Then what happens is there are several points at which that hormonal pathway is stopped. And that is the same with any assisted fertility treatment. Obviously, IVF is a little bit different if somebody is going through a full cycle. Some of your listeners, again, may know about natural cycle IVF, where it will still mean that they're looking for a healthy response of you ovulating. Yes. However, if they are controlling that ovulation with drugs, it still needs a healthy response from the uterus, for example, to be able to build that uterine lining with something called progesterone. We know that the adrenal gland, when it produces adrenaline and cortisol, cortisol in particularly, we call the adrenaline steel. The cortisol we call the progesterone steel.
Yeah, because it's pregnenolone. So, you're talking cortisol. Cortisol requires pregnenolone. It's stealing all the pregnenolone instead of producing, progesterone. So that kind of thing is really, whoa, what just happened there? It's just a tiny little bit of information that's so crucially important in terms of relating it to stress. What about subconscious blocks? So we've got about 10 minutes left. If we can move on talking about subconscious blocks, and how can psychotherapy and what you do, Sharon, kind of, how can that help?
Okay, so certainly it can help with both identifying subconscious blocks if they're hidden. It may be people working through what is their reason, thinking of your own example earlier, being able to think through, actually, why do you want to do this? How do you feel about this? How do you feel about parenthood? How do you feel about being pregnant? And that alone, and the psychotherapy involved in that, of course, it's not just as simple as asking the question, but that might uncover, for example, someone that it has got real fears about a change in body shape. It may be that they have body dysmorphic feelings already.
I didn't even think of that. My goodness. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. So you can imagine how pregnancy and the thought of pregnancy could actually terrify them. And again, that may be at a subconscious level. It may be that they know that they've had issues with body image. However, they don't realize it's linked to fertility, for example. So it may be something that's kind of out there, but they just haven't made that connection. It may be that they feel they don't deserve to be a parent. It may be that they're angry at their partner because of something that's going on, and they want to punish them. We've seen all of these. I'm not just these up as not real issues. We've seen all of them and more. It may be it's a male partner, because we work with men as well, and we know that stress and subconscious blocks can certainly affect sperm production and sperm count Ultimately.
We can talk about that in the male fertility. There's some really amazing experts coming up who do andrology and, male fertility. And so hopefully we'll be able to connect a lot of this together, because I think, we've got experts in different fields, and we say holistically, if you pull it all together, it looks like something really powerful. Obviously you need to, people need to trust you. So what is it that needs to be done in order that you establish that trust with somebody, and then help them through whatever those blockages are and those subconscious kind of, things that they perhaps don't even realize themselves?
Yeah. Well, I suppose with trust, we've got to understand the position that we're working from, first of all. So in other words, they may have had their mistrust built up because of previous professionals or medical professionals that they've been involved in. It may be some of those subconscious blocks that are actually relational blocks. So sometimes you've got a bit of an uphill climb already, because their subconscious is saying, don't trust. So, it is not as simple of just putting the ordinary trust elements in. We've got to find out, is there an issue with trusting, first of all? And obviously we may be able to work through that issue, first of all. But ultimately, it is very simple. People need to feel that they're listened to. They need to feel that they're understood. They need to feel that they're understood without judgment. People get so embarrassed about what they feel their particular issues are, and feeling like you'll have never heard it before, you're going to be shocked by it, so they build up all sorts of hang-ups even before they share things with you. So they need to be able to feel that you're going to listen without judgment, and that's what we're here for. We use a lot of associations and anchors, particularly if someone has had a build-up of negative anchors. Like we had a woman whose dad, although he was retired, had been a gynecologist working in fertility. However, he was quite a controlling man, and so her experience as his daughter was that he was very controlling. I won't go further into detail with that. So actually, her need to trust was actually related to her dad, who just happened to be a gynecologist.
Wow, that's really deep rooted. And I suppose as individuals, we don't really think about it. I mean, I'd love to go backwards and kind of explore what my blockages were really. In a sense, I must have had some that I don't know about. I mean, I'm so far from that now, and I don't want to revisit where I was then. But it would have been really interesting to understand that whole thing, because after 8 miscarriages and then giving birth to a stillborn son, I still didn't know, because the doctors were saying, well, there's nothing wrong with you genetically, you're not rejecting the his sperm or the grow, you're not your hormones are fine, this is fine, you haven't got any, of the 9 pregnancies, only one was trisomy 13, which is obviously one that is likely not to succeed anyway in the first place. So there were no reasons. And, I went to experts at the Great Portland Hospital for Women and Children. I went to St. Mary's Hospital to an expert there. And, they and asked them the questions. Well, what why? If everything is okay, then why do I keep not going past, the 8, 10, 12 weeks? And the only time I went past that was so it's very interesting. And I would just call out to anyone who is going through that, perhaps, that journey, and is into that journey early. So maybe 1, 2, if you've already, and I'm sorry if you have, but, if you have already suffered miscarriages, then reach out earlier. Why go through that 9 years of pain or 10 years of pain and emotional turmoil? So obviously, when people are listening, Sharon, it's easy birthing. Your website is www.easybirthing.com, correct?
That's right. But easy with an I.
Easy with an I, yes. Easy with an I. EASI birthing.com. So people reach out to Sharon. There's a whole team there ready to help you. Sharon, we've got a couple of minutes left. So what would your summary be of this whole kind of psychological, emotional thing? In one word, in my words, is reach out sooner, because you just can save yourself so much pain, strife, trouble, emotional distress and everything. What would your kind of summary of it be?
Mm-hmm. I would completely agree. I would say reach out. Don't be embarrassed. There's nothing to be embarrassed about, but people still feel it. Reach out. Have someone there who can listen, even if there aren't any blocks or there isn't any stress. There's still that psychological experience of a fertility journey, and you could really benefit and in fact deserve to have someone there holding your hand, someone who is someone who's
had 27 years experience in the field, Sharon. Someone like that.
Yeah, but also someone who's objective, someone who's not involved.
Yes, you're outside of it, so you can actually look at it with eyes that are not involved.
Yeah, exactly that.
Yeah,
exactly.
Well, that's wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. And I can't thank you enough again for being on the show. I know that we're going to, in the new year, kind of set up some sessions on things like, is it tocophobia? Is it tocophobia, fear of giving birth? Is that right?
Yeah. Tocophobia. Yep.
So I'm really looking forward to, talking to you about that. And in the meantime, I know it's only November, but if we don't speak again, have a happy season of jollies and festivities. And I look forward to you very much bringing you back on in the new year and speaking to you again. Thank you, Sharon. And, wish you all the best until we speak again.
And you. Thank you very much.
Bye, everybody. And goodbye, everyone. And we'll speak again soon.
Welcome to Fertility Matters with Golnish and Lucas on the UK Health Radio. Here we discuss all things fertility, from cutting-edge science to medical interventions and traditional holistic medicine, from preconception to pregnancy and beyond. Let's start our fertility journey on the world #1 Talk Health Radio.